It all began with a gruesome discovery, a body, lifeless, in a pool of blood. The clock read 10 p.m., and time was not on our side. Detective Parker knew every minute mattered. The killer was out there, somewhere in the city, and they had exactly 1 hour to catch him before he could strike again. With the city map sprawled before them, the team began their frantic search, marking every possible hideout the killer could use. They had to act fast, lives were at stake. The chase was on. With every second that passed, the killer could be moving farther away, disappearing into the night. The pressure was immense. Detective Parker's mind raced as fast as his car. He replayed the scene in his head, searching for anything they might have missed, anything that could lead them to the killer. The first location was a dead end, a dark alleyway, silent and empty. But the clock was still ticking, and they couldn't afford to waste time. Back at the precinct, a witness had come forward, terrified, but willing to talk. This could be the break they needed. Every word the witness spoke was vital. They pointed to a location, a place the killer was known to frequent. The detectives had a new target. With this new lead, the team regrouped. The tension was palpable. They had less than 40 minutes to bring this killer to justice. The warehouse was silent, foreboding. This was the place, the killer's last known hideout. But was he still inside? Every step they took was calculated. The silence was deafening, each creak of the floorboards like a gunshot in the night. With a single gesture, they moved in. The doors flew open, light flooding the dark space. The moment of truth had arrived. There he was, the killer, cornered, with nowhere left to run. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. Time seemed to stand still. In this moment, it was a battle of wills. Who would make the first move? With a sigh of resignation, the killer surrendered. The clock read 10:55 p.m., just in time. Justice had prevailed. But the story didn't end with the arrest. As they transported the killer back to the precinct, something didn't sit right with Detective Parker. The city was quiet, almost too quiet. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from over. In a split second, the killer made his move, an escape attempt. Chaos erupted in the van as it swerved dangerously on the road. The van crashed, and the killer took his chance, sprinting into the woods. The detectives were right on his heels. This chase was far from over. Through the dense forest, they ran, their flashlights barely piercing the night. The killer was fast, but so were they. The killer's desperation was palpable as he stumbled over a fallen log. The detectives were closing in, ready to end this chase once and for all. There was no more running. Surrounded and out of breath, the killer finally surrendered, his hands trembling as he raised them in the air. The tension broke as the detectives cuffed him, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. They had him, this time, for good. As they lead him back to the van, the killer's defiance was gone. This chase was over, but the night had taken its toll. Back at the precinct, they combed through the evidence once more. Something still didn't add up, and Detective Parker couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. And then it hit him, a vital clue they had overlooked, hidden in plain sight. The real mastermind was still out. Panic set in as Detective Parker rushed to his superior's office. They had caught the wrong man. The true killer was still out there. A piece of jewelry, so easily overlooked in the chaos, was the key. It didn't belong to the victim, or the man they had just arrested. As Parker connected the dots, the horrifying truth unraveled. The real killer had planted this piece, orchestrating the entire chase to frame an innocent man. The room grew cold as the detectives gathered. They had been chasing shadows while the real threat remained at large, biding his time. In a dark corner of the city, the true mastermind watched the news unfold. The police had played right into his hands, and he couldn't help but smile. As he gazed out over the city, his mind was already working on the next move. This was far from over, he was only just beginning. In his hand, another piece of evidence, a new trap, a new victim. He was always one step ahead, always in control. Meanwhile, the man they had arrested sat in an interrogation room, desperate to prove his innocence. His life had been torn apart, all because of a clever deception. Detective Parker listened to the man's story, his heart heavy with guilt. They had been so focused on the chase that they had missed the bigger picture. But this mistake wouldn't be the end. Now, they were more determined than ever to find the real killer and bring him to justice. The hunt resumed, more intense than ever. Every piece of footage, every scrap of evidence was examined with fresh eyes. Detective Parker worked tirelessly, refusing to rest until they had the right man in custody. The clock was ticking once again, but this time, they wouldn't make same mistake. With renewed determination, the team prepared for the final confrontation. This time, they knew exactly who they were dealing with, and they wouldn't let him slip away. The park was quiet, too quiet. It was the perfect place for the final showdown. The detectives moved into position spring trap. Unaware of the trap, the killer moved through the park, confident in his deception. He had no idea that his time was finally running out. From every corner, the detectives closed in, weapons at the ready. This time, there would be no escape. Realizing the trap too late, the killer made a desperate dash for freedom, but the net was already closing in around him. The chase was frantic, the air thick with tension. Every step brought them closer to the inevitable conclusion. And then, it was over. The killer stumbled, the detectives moved in, and the struggle came to a swift end. Justice had finally caught up with him. Handcuffed and defeated, the killer's facade of control shattered. He was no longer the mastermind, just another criminal caught in the act. As they lead him away, the park was filled with the flashing lights of justice. The city could finally breathe easy. But as they watched him go, a sobering thought lingered: how close they had come to letting him slip away. It was a lesson they would never forget.
For the innocent man, freedom came with mixed emotions. Relief, yes, but also the haunting memory of the hours spent as a falsely accused criminal. Detective Parker knew that an apology wouldn't erase what had happened, but it was a start. It was a moment of humanity in the midst of a harrowing case. As they returned to the precinct, the detectives knew they had done their duty. But they also knew that this case had taught them something invaluable. Never take anything for granted.
The media buzzed with the news of the arrest. At the press conference, the police chief commended the team's efforts, but the detectives remained solemn, aware of how close they had come to failure. The questions came fast, the cameras flashing. The story was sensational, but for the detectives, it was a reminder of the thin line between success and disaster. As they walked away, they knew this case would stay with them. But there were more cases, more lives at stake, and they had to be ready, lessons learned, and never to be forgotten. In the quiet of his office, Parker reflected on the case. The chase had been intense, but it was the lessons learned that would last. His fingers traced the edge of an unsolved case file, another mystery, another puzzle waiting to be solved. He knew now more than ever that no detail was too small, no lead too insignificant. As the city buzzed with life below, Parker's resolve strengthened. The darkness might always be there, lurking in the shadows, but so would he, ready to bring the truth to light no matter the cost. Stepping out into the evening air, Parker felt the weight of the case lift off his shoulders. The case was closed, but his journey was far from over. The city spread out before him, alive and full of secrets. But with every case, every lesson, he was more prepared to face what came next. His phone buzzed, a new case, a new mystery. With a deep breath, Parker answered the call, ready to dive back into the shadows, knowing that every case brought him one step closer to the light.